I'm Grandmaster Grigory Kaidanov, and today's video will be dedicated to those of you who play on chess.com and your rating range is anywhere from 0 to 2000. Your first move is e4, and you have some trouble against Sicilian. If you look at Grandmaster games, probably 90% of Grandmaster games feature knight f3 and then so-called open Sicilian. At this point, Black can play systems like Najdorf, Sveshnikov, Dragon, Paulsen, Richter-Rauser, so huge number of different systems for White, and each of them features systems and subsystems and just humongous amount of theory. And still, even if you learn all this theory, there is no guarantee you will get an advantage after the opening. So, if you are not a professional player, and if you have trouble memorizing those lines, and if you feel like you are not getting into positions you like, then you should play those open Sicilians. Until recently, players who found themselves in those situations almost exclusively played so-called Grand Prix attack, which is knight c3, knight c6, and f4. And for a long time, this system brought a great success for White players. However, recently, I think the trend is changing. If we would have this conversation 10 years ago, I would definitely recommend this system. Roman Djindjikashvili recorded some DVD videos with this system for White, and they had great success, and White players had a great success with this. But I think this system became so popular that Black players had to study it. They did learn how to play against this, and judging from games of my students, it seems like White is hitting the wall. If you are not one of those players who are hitting the wall, you play Grand Prix and your results are good, there is no reason for you to switch. You probably should keep playing. However, from what I see, at some point when you will be somewhere between 1700 and 1900, you almost certainly will hit the wall. The biggest problem for White is that in the main line, which goes something like this, by the way, bishop c4 is met by e6, knight g7, and d5. Black obtains very good position in the center, very difficult for White to play this position. So, bishop b5 was a move which was recommended by Roman in his videos, and after something like this, despite the fact that Black has a bishop pair, White was doing very well. However, Black came up with this great system when he plays d5, if he takes d5, a6, knight c3, knight f6, Black is going to win this pawn. Black has a bishop pair, and White has really nothing to brag about, like d4, c4, and sometimes Black can even sacrifice the pawn. He doesn't have to, but even if he does, those positions, despite the fact that Black is down a pawn, are still good for Black because his bishop pair gives him great compensation. Open position, bishop pair, Black can play bishop e6, Black can just check on c3, castle, and then develop this light square bishop. This bishop is a serious problem. You can see it's blocked by this pawn, going nowhere. Things are even worse for White if instead of e takes d5 he plays e5. This bishop becomes even worse piece, and my heart was bleeding when I was watching games of my students. I don't like to switch my students from openings which they are playing. I always rather improve their openings rather than recommend playing that. But after several of them play this system and keep losing game after game because of this incredibly passive bishop on c1, I just had enough. And so I started recommending them to switch from Grand Prix. And my recommendation would be so-called Alapin, or C3 Sicilian. This move is very natural. The idea is very simple. You would like to play d4 and form a very strong center. Those of you who know name of Grandmaster Sveshnikov are probably mostly familiar with this name because of the opening system which he popularized. However, it's a real person. It's not only the system, it's a real person. Grandmaster Yevgeny Sveshnikov is a very outspoken person, and those who know him personally, I'm sure, enjoyed many conversations with him. Yevgeny Sveshnikov is a big proponent of Alapin system. It's very interesting. There are very few players like him who play the same systems all their lives. So he's probably in his early 60s now, and he played C3 Sicilian since he was a little kid, and he never switched. And those of you who were around him know how passionate he is about this system, and he can talk forever how Sicilian is not a good opening because you play C3 and you play D4, and sometimes it might be even annoying, but you can not admire his enthusiasm for this opening. And of course he has many games which he won. He's not the only one. There are many other grandmasters who play C3 on more or less regular basis with good results. And recently I joined them. I just played a tournament in Argentina, the Continental Championship, and all of a sudden I got tired of playing D4 and getting all those positions which may be okay, but I just wanted something new. And I played C3 in several of my white games, and I won them surprisingly easily. I also felt like it's almost like obligation. I recommend my students to play C3. I have to show that I can do it too. All right, so what are your opponent's most likely responses? First of all, you would be surprised how often when you play either blitz chess or even slow chess, your opponents will give you a gift on winning right after the opening. There will be games which will continue with something like this. Now, the only move for black is d5, but your opponents will play a move like this. You push, they will check, move knight somewhere here, here, check, and already on move 8, you're up a piece. I don't think it will happen very often, but it will happen occasionally. And so that's kind of a nice bonus to have winning position on move 8 when you're really just trying to play chess. Of course, this is extreme case. This is kind of example of how not to play with black. But the bottom line is whenever your opponent makes some kind of move like d6, e6, b6, and allows you to play d4, you automatically do it. The main two moves which are featured maybe the most often in Grandmaster games, and probably will be more often in your games, are knight f6 and d5. Let's start with knight f6. White plays e5 and black plays knight d5. Now, white has a variety of different systems that he can play. Like for example, white can play d4 followed by knight f3. White can play knight f3 and postpone d4. For example, there is this very interesting system when white plays this way and postpones d4 for later, because the idea is that if black does this, white doesn't have to play d4 right away. White can castle and wait for a better moment to play d4. Like for example, sometimes white plays knight a3, d4, knight b5. We'll see, by the way, this idea later in a little bit different situation. And there are many other ideas here. Good system for white. I like it. There is nothing wrong with d4 system. Here you can check with a queen, or like I said, you can play knight f3 and later check with a pawn. But the system which I would cover today starts with this move g3. The reason I decided to present this system for you just because I felt it's simpler. It doesn't mean that it's better than the systems which I showed to you just a couple minutes ago, but it's just simpler. That's the biggest advantage. So my goal is to show to you the way to play for white, that you will get comfortable position after the opening. You will not be overwhelmed by a number of variations, and it will be relatively simple to understand ideas. And g3 move features all those traits which I mentioned. When you play this system, your goal is not to win game quickly by any means. And that's, I think, it's a good approach for opening period. Unfortunately, too many of you, when you look for opening repertoire, you look for some kind of a killer's opening, like fried liver attack, heaven's gambit, which, by the way, are maybe not bad choices. However, in Sicilian, like I would say the most popular gambit, if we're talking about gambits, is so-called Smith-Morra gambit. I wouldn't recommend Smith-Morra gambit for my students, though it is exciting opening on the surface. You really are trying to win your pawn back in majority of variations, and sometimes you succeed and end up with equal position, and sometimes you don't, and you just are pawned down. Again, this is against best play. If you are playing Smith-Morra and you are successful with that, then good luck. Keep playing that, and once again, I'm sure at some point you hit the wall and you will have to change it. But if you are successful, that's fine. Now, let's look at g3. What I'm going to do now, and this will be true about other systems as well, I'm not going to give you a huge number of theory. We're just going to go over several Grandmaster games, and you will just see some ideas which you will be able to use in your own games. So here, the first game we're going to look at featured black's move knight c6, attacking this pawn, but interestingly enough, you don't have to protect it. You can play bishop g2, which allows you to attack this knight and save a tempo on developing this bishop. e6 is very natural, knight f3, and now black played d6, which is the best move. This pawn takes some space from black pieces, and it makes perfect sense to trade this pawn. Takes on d6. By the way, a little bit later we will look at some games in which black doesn't play d6, and then he will experience some problems with space. So d6, e takes d6, bishop takes d6, both sides castle, and now finally the moment comes for white to play d4 and open his pieces. In this particular game, black played c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight takes d4, queen takes d4. You know that you are not supposed to bring your queen early in the game, but the reason for that is usually because you don't want your queen to be chased by the opponent's pieces. Like for example, if knight is on b8 and he plays knight c6, then it's true, then your queen has to run around and you're just wasting your time. However, here, he can't attack your queen, and white's position is very comfortable. Ideally, white would like to play c4, knight c3, to bring his bishop either to e3 or maybe even exchange it on f4. Rooks will go on d1 and e1. That's how you'd like to set up your pieces. In this position, it went even better than that. Black played bishop to d7, quite sophisticated move, which most of your opponents probably will not play. The idea is that black is perfectly happy to sacrifice his pawn, and white should not take this pawn. If white plays this, this, and this, winning a pawn, after bishop c6, black is clearly better. Not just compensation for the pawn, clearly better. This is exactly the situation I just described a few seconds ago. Your queen is running around, you have no development, this bishop is a monster on this diagonal, white is much worse. So don't even think about taking pawn like this and giving your bishop. With pawns on f2, g3, and h2, your bishop on g2 is the main defender of your king. So you don't want to exchange it unless it's something extraordinary. So white did not take this, and he played c4, obviously aiming to win a piece. If knight moves away, he's just going to take the bishop. Black saw that and played queen b6, and that's where Black's calculation probably ended. He probably saw that after queen takes b6, knight takes b6, he saves his knight, and like bishop takes b7, again, is not something Black needs to worry about. After rook b8, let's say bishop a6, we are again in familiar situation when white is up a pawn, but no development. And Black will have great compensation for the pawn here. So white is not even trying to do that. White plays rook to d1, attacking this bishop. And now Black is facing a problem. And he made a mistake right away. He probably should move bishop away with something like bishop e7, in which case white will probably continue with something like knight to c3. Remember that Black can never take this pawn because of rook takes d7, or alternative is maybe bishop e3. So white has this fantastic bishop on d2, nice development and the pawn majority on the queen side. But Black decided to take this pawn, and it ended game relatively quickly. So now Black is going to lose a piece. Black's idea basically was that if white plays b3, he can play bishop to e5, and though white wins 2 pieces for the rook, Black is going to have still very good development. But white didn't play b3. He played bishop to f1, attacking this knight. Black played rook ac8. Still looks okay for Black, because, for example, if white plays bishop takes c4, rook takes c4, he can take this bishop because bishop on c1 is hanging. But things turn out to be much simpler. White played knight c3, and right here, Black resigned because he's going to lose a knight. Don't count that your opponents will resign when they lose a piece. Not going to happen. However, we will stop our analysis here because you should be able to win with extra bishop or knight. If you don't, then I will have to do a separate video on how to win with extra piece. But right now, basically bishop takes c4 is a threat. This bishop cannot move because the bishop on d7 is going to be lost, and so Black is losing a piece. Game ended. All right. Next game. This featured the same opening. e4, c5, c3, knight f6, e5, knight d5, g3. Unlike in the previous game when Black played knight c6, in this particular game Black played d6 right away. Now this move is not going to work. You're not going to win time like in the previous game, because after pawn takes pawn, he's going to protect his knight and win a pawn at the same time. So you have to take this pawn right away. Black took with a queen. White develops his bishop anyway. And here, unlike in the previous game, you're going to develop your knight on e2, not on f3. This is sometimes a problem of remembering the opening moves. My suggestion is, don't try just memorize your moves. Try to put more emphasis on remembering the opponent's systems, and this will make it easier for you to remember how you should play against them. So, for example, here the advice is, if the e-file is not open, I put my knight on f3. If the e-file is open, I need to shield my king and play knight e2. in the game, in this position, black played knight c6, and for example, if you play knight f3, queen e6 check will be quite unpleasant. You either have to move your king, which you all know is not good in the opening, or to play queen e2 and trade queens and lose right for castle anyway. In many openings, after trading queens, king is not bad in the center. It's actually sometimes good to have king in the center, but not in these particular positions. Still, too many pieces on the board, still vulnerable king, just there is no reason to do that. Knight e2 was a move which was played in this game, and black played e6, white castled. I'm actually twisting the moves order a little bit, but they did arrive to this position. So d4 would lead us to very similar position we had in the previous game. However, in this particular game, white used idea which I already mentioned in a little bit different line. He played knight a3 first. This move is good itself, even if you go to c4. Black castled. And now, instead of playing knight c4 and d3, which unfortunately many of you do in similar situations, remember, if you have a choice to push pawn on one square up or two squares up, you almost always should go for two squares. It's true that if your rating is 1200, the majority of games you lose or win because of bad blunders. It's not because you push pawn on one square or two, but because at some point you or your opponent blunder a queen, blunders checkmate, or a piece, bishop or a knight. However, when you have more space, the chances that your opponent will blunder are greater. Because what does it mean having more space? It means covering more squares. So if you cover a lot of squares, there is a chance that your opponent will drop a piece on one of those squares which you control is much greater. So fight for space, push your pawns, because pushing pawns usually guarantees you more space. And this will help you to avoid some blunders and will at the same time provoke more blunders from your opponent. So white did play d4, and after c takes d4, he didn't take it right away. He played this knight b5 move, which, like I said, is one of the typical ideas in Alapin Sicilian. Queen c5, knights were traded. Now here one of the questions just to check how alert you are, like why e5 is a bad move. You can pause the video and just take a short think and find out how does white win in this situation. And the answer is that white just plays knight b3 and black is losing the knight, which is subject of attack by two white pieces. So black plays rook d8, hoping to play e5, but white plays queen e2, avoiding the pawn and stopping the e5 period. Black played e6, which was probably not a good move. Rook d1, queen c7. So this is a very interesting situation. There is a problem with this bishop. Like, where do I develop this bishop? It's not only problem of this particular position, this is problem of many different openings, and in Alapin as well, in general. So white finds very good solution. c4, driving this knight away, knight b6, and b3. So this is kind of a typical structure, typical idea, typical way to handle those situations. Now, knight is on b6 is kind of bad. The bishop can go to b2, e3. White has excellent position. Game continued. Bishop f6, bishop e3, bishop d7, rook ac1. All those moves are very simple. Black played bishop to e8. White played queen e1. Grandmaster type of move. Very subtle, very nice move. The idea is that queen is ready to jump either to b4 or maybe even a5, pinning the knight and putting pressure on b6. Fantastic move. Black played knight d7 in anticipation of queen a5, but white still played queen b4, attacking this pawn now twice with a queen and a bishop. Black played rook a b8. Now white played f4. Remember about pawn moves I mentioned? Push your pawns, gain space. Black interpreted this more like f5 kind of threat, so he played g6. By the way, look at how terrible the bishop on e8 is. And now white came up with a very nice tactical shot. Knight b5. The idea is knight cannot be taken because now the queen is trapped. No squares for the queen. Black played queen c8, knight d6, queen c7, c5. Strategically, white is completely winning. And he wrapped up game tactically in just a couple more moves. White is going to play c6. Black played rook bc8. Probably black was already in time trouble. But white just moved queen away. And next move took on d8. So black lost the game. Okay, this will end up the first part of our excursus into C3 Sicilian. Please look for the second part of Alapin C3 Sicilian video. This was Grandmaster Grigory Kaidanov. Hope to meet you again on chess.com.